Hey, Matt, and anyone else who watches this. I don't expect to be anyone else, but I just wanted to reflect some of my thoughts about the last couple of broadcasts before they completely skip out of my mind. Sorry to hear you're feeling poorly, chap. Um, Thanks very much for doing the Monday evening philosophy thing. It's really good to have some food for thought. Thanks very much. I'm going to go back and listen again to your statement that you read um, just this last Monday. It, it's probably best to do that before I tell you this, but I wanted you to have something, as you said you were ill, and I said I'd feed you back some stuff. So 13 thoughts or collections of thoughts. I'll just ramble through these. Uh, One, thrive. You mentioned tools to thrive with. Flow was what came for me about that. That it's important to have. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who's one of the positive psychology uh, dudes. Martin Seligman et al. Uh, a whole raft of dudes who study people who get on really well in life rather than looking at abnormal psychology and trying to reverse engineer something that doesn't look awful. They look at people who are quite well adjusted, thank you very much. And one of the concepts that they have come up with is flow, which has been fairly popularized. I'm sure you've an idea of kind of being in the zone. But basically, there's an XY graph and capability or capacity um, is along the X or Y. I don't think it matters which. And up the Y is complexity of the task. So if the line which is kind of the 45-degree wiggle kind of goes in and out of a task being really complex, and you have to concentrate and focus, and then it becomes within your capacity and too easy. So because that happens, if you're not careful, then you'll get bored and you'll drop off. Your performance will drop off. So you have to make the task more complex. Um, and then it requires your focus. And because anything that requires all of your focus in order to accomplish, that's what makes you enter the flow state. It has to be um, complex enough for you to require all your focus, but not too complex, because otherwise you'll drop off the other way and you'll think, oh, this is just too hard, bollocks. So getting that mix right, I'm sure you know as a lecturer, it's really important to engage your listeners at a place where they can understand what it is you're talking about, but um, you know, engage them in such a way that they have to concentrate and think about what it is you're saying. Uh, so yeah, and I think that's in it as a tool for thriving. That is something that we can take on for ourselves if you take it along with the sort of circle of awareness that Stanislavski talks about in his book, well, various books, but An Actor Prepares is certainly in there, where as an actor you can have your circle of awareness inside your skin envelope and only be aware of kind of what's going on internally and not acknowledge any other character on stage. You can have it 3 feet around you, literally, a yard, so that your circle of awareness is very small, and so therefore, to put that into real life, you talked about inter, intra, and extra. I think you mentioned Fanon's schizophrenia analysis talks about the individual, the group, and the community. The words um, intra, inter, and extra kind of sum those up for me in order to be able to facilitate more or less difficult tasks for yourself in order to engage and thrive. Goal setting, or just dealing with, doesn't even have to be goal setting, just kind of engaging with those kind of circles can be the problems with engaging with those three areas can be sort of analysed in that aspect to avoid discouragement and to remain engaged. Just about the word philosophia, we talked a little bit briefly about some of the etymology of those of the word philosophy. Philo, Sophia, could be friendship, loving, dear. The filial bit of it, philo, Latin philo, and the Sophia, obviously wisdom, but also judgment, jurisdiction, and this is getting on to the root word of the dom is about jurisdiction, the dominion, and the weid, W-E-I-D, to see, the old English, old Germanic, I can't remember which it is. But anyway, you've been talking about, and this is kind of meta with what you're doing with your discussions, you are seeing and then speaking, and that's all part of the process that you're trying to describe of thriving and developing cunning, to the idea that you have to see and you can't see unless you can describe. So I think that seeing and describing kind of creates light. And third thing you mentioned related to this, you mentioned sometimes you just have to do things and then think about it later. It's interesting in the creation story in the Bible, the Spirit moved upon the waters, and then God said, "Let there be light." So there was a movement, and then there was light in the creation story. The Gnostics talk about there being what is gnosis, or how do you describe the Gnostic path? And one of the descriptions is that it's a movement and a rest and a movement, or a rest followed by a movement, then a rest. So yeah, very much that kind of do, analyze, adopt, adapt, improve. That kind of examined life, I think, is a really important aspect to philosophy being of any use. On the thoughts of philosophy, there's a great quote by John McMurray, who's a Scottish philosopher, who talks about friendship a great deal, and the sort of the I'm going to have to find the quote for you before I and come back for you, but it's basically something about like ideas are only valuable insofar as they tend towards friendship, essentially. There's a I have to look it up. Sorry, this is why I should have prepared more before I did this. You mentioned consciousness outside the brain. No, fourth point. Can we say that? You were going towards that. There's a lot out there about panpsychism. Rupert Sheldrake, morphogenic fields, that sort of thing. The idea being out there, and we are receivers that interpret pre-existing ideas, or that we receive the transmission of the intelligence that exists, that is extant or whatever. Some interesting research that Sheldrake has done there, and Winnie the Pooh has got a good one. He says, I can't remember if it's thoughts or music, but he says if you want to think a great thought, you have to go to where the great thoughts hang out. Or if you want to hum a new tune, you have to go to the place where a good tune can find you, basically. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, whether or not you can debate the primacy of creating the space before the guest arrives, or is received, you might say. Thinking of thoughts as guests, kind of thing. And if you're not, when the teacher is ready, the student will appear. Vice versa, the student ready, teacher will appear. basically, communication can only occur when the idea and the whether it has been spoken or is extant, it cannot be received unless the receiver is ready to receive it and interpret it in some way. So that is probably a negotiation of some sort. You mentioned. Did you mention toast boast? Why have I put toast boast oath? Oh yes. So this is about the power of prophecy, which I'll perhaps say a bit more about later on. That there is this revolutionary spirit. Again, I can't remember who said it. I must look it up. But liberalism is not sufficiently powerful to tackle fascism. It ends up it winds up tolerating intolerance, essentially. And so radicalism, radical opposition, is required in order to fight fascism, basically. And your process of seeing and speaking to power and then doing with is really important. I thought that the toast, boast and oath of the it's still practiced within Azatru, the Odinist faith. I can't cite you historical references for Norse cultures actually practicing it, but certainly it is taught by certain. It's a religious practice whereby a little bit of like a drinking. It's not a drinking game by any chance. It's a drinking ritual at a moot, or a thing as they would probably call it, where you start off by toasting and simply praising and saying, this is of value, this is of worth. So you're sort of bringing you're affirming values, you're affirming worth, and it's not goal setting, it's sharing the treasures of the tribe, you might say, and affirming what is good in life and in your experience. And then with the boast, you talk about a little bit closer to home what you've done, which you believe is of worthy or someone else has done. You can boast about another person. Rather than simply praising, you can talk about deeds, and that this was a worthy deed, whether you've done it or not. And then an oath is essentially my understanding of prophecy. If your prophecy is going to be binding, then whatever you declare in the prophecy, you are then responsible to do everything within your power to make sure that thing comes to pass. So likewise with an oath, there's always a person in this thing ritual where it's called the remembrancer, I think, to sort of bring people to a remembrance of themselves and propriety, to make sure that with the drinking, people don't get themselves into trouble and promise too much, or swear by this god or that god or the gods that a certain thing will come to pass, and then find themselves in trouble when they kind of can't pay the debt which they have spoken, and the word of that person then becomes devalued, and that's very much a kind of the primal currency, a primal economy, you could say, sort of very much about the kind of the gift economy that sustains primal cultures. When I say primal cultures, really non-developed, native, some people call native or aboriginal, or whatever, but kind of cultures which haven't been abstracted, removed from the land, and very much your talk is about becoming animal, becoming land. Can we do that? Can we become earth? Can we become animal? I think the practice of of saying what is worth, what is a worthy deed, and then saying, this is a thing I can see. I'm going to do it. Even if it's only to yourself, you might say it's a goal setting or holding yourself accountable or something like that. To those three levels: yourself, your group, and your community. I think that's really, really valuable. Bear with me. Yeah, that was shopping at the door. Sorry about that. What was I saying? Prophecy, maybe? Can't remember. Toast both those. Don't know. Freedom. You've spoken a great deal about freedom in the lecture with Eric to start off with, which made me think of Viktor Frankl and what he calls the last human freedom. He was a survivor of the Auschwitz internment camp, work labour camp, death camp, and he said that he noticed, well, a couple of things came out of that. That the last human freedom was that one can choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. And he was saying that, I think he was being interrogated and beaten at the time or something like that, and he recognised that he, however badly he was being treated, they couldn't make him hate them. He could choose an attitude of compassion, which then led towards creativity. So your liberty can be limited in a great many ways, but the final freedom, the capacity to choose, lies intra within oneself, and that perhaps is the foundation of success for the other two. Be true unto yourself, as I think it's Polonius said in Hamlet, and then it follows, as night the day, thou canst be false to no man. Make something of what you've been made into. Again, a phrase which takes you where you are and doesn't presuppose any kind of skill set or knowledge, but wherever you are, whatever you've become, whatever you have been made into, broken into, moulded into, make something of it. One of the teachings that I've come across is from a guy called Stephen Jenkinson, and he asked the question, what did it take to make you? So that can go in all kinds of ways, but have you ever considered what it took for you to be here? And that leads to, I think, the idea of the big story and where you fit into the big story, whatever you see that as, whether it tends towards science or mythology or the story of your area or your family, however big you can go to have a sense of yourself as a link in the chain of at least humanity, but certainly the wider, evolutionary or mythological cycle of life. Why are you here? Who put you here? What was destroyed? What was married? What was cherished that resulted in you? And that can help to give a perspective of a broader sense of self, a perspective of it's not about you, that you are not your own, that you were bought, you were paid for with someone else's blood, sweat and tears, and that likewise what you do will cause the inheritance of others. And there's a great deal to be done there in terms of the work of genetically inherited trauma, the work of what's his name, Peter Levine, his Soma techniques, that kind of thing, and Gabor Mate also talks a great deal about the trauma that we give and receive, and the kind of understanding that we have to that position of understanding that we have to come for in order to facilitate anything more useful than a kind of a tit-for-tat response, which you were kind of talking about. Sort of the difference between like reacting and responding, I think, is a really important distinction to make. That if you didn't talk about it, then you certainly alluded to it. A dream is not a dream until it is shared. The longevity of religions came to mind. And obviously, I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. How do you enter into life with any kind of positivity? You need a dream. I can't remember what the response of Eric was. You need a dream. In order to have a revolution, you need to have a dream. I think certainly that what we're doing here in terms of throwing ideas around and hoping one of them will stick on the wall is part of sifting that, and part of the kind of part of the search for meaning, part of the digging for a firm foundation, the knocking in of a hammer, sort of planting it, staking a claim. What is it that we're doing? Those practices and beliefs and myths then become, when they become communal, from group to community, they can become religions. The word religion, to tie again, religate, ligature, the bits that join the sinews, kind of thing. Those are all ligaments and ligatures. When we retie ourselves to that big story, to each other, to ourselves, looking at the connecting bits, I think that's really important. And sharing what you can of your dream is why I'm doing this, why I'm recording this. So yeah, there's faith in action, you might say. Thor. Power. Great deeds. I think this is following on from the fascist ideas that you need to challenge great power structures. You need great ambition or great determination. There's a story about Thor when he goes to the land of the giants, Jotunheim. He gets fooled. He's with Loki and with another shepherd guy, I think, and they get fooled into these contests. And he has this confidence, and they say, well, what are you good at? And he says, well, I'm good at eating, I'm good at drinking, I'm good at wrestling. And they give him a horn, and he drinks it, and it isn't going at all, and he's taking drink. He can't drain it dry. And likewise, he's when he's eating, I can't remember Thor might have a couple of different tasks. That might be Loki's actually, but whatever. He gets these 3 tasks which he tries immensely. He performs really like big effort, and at the end of the story, it's not Laufey, I can't remember the name of the giant, says to the 3 Asgardians, or Loki and Thor, don't feel disheartened because the horn was attached to the seas of the earth, and you took such a mighty gulp that you actually made the entire sea recede like, you know, a whole inch or a whole yard or something like that for the whole world. And likewise, the person that you wrestled was actually the biggest giant in the world, and you know, we disguised him as a dwarf or something like that. So the idea is that you've if you have the kind of the confidence about yourself to do mighty deeds, you may fail, but you will gain reputation. And we have giants that roam our land. We have capitalism. We have COVID-19. We have all kinds of structures like the Black Lives Matter, movement is trying to throw off the shackles of racism, overt, covert, institutionalized, systematized, etc. These are giants which live among us, and that kind of tilting at windmills, Don Quixote kind of, it doesn't matter that I'm going to fail in the attempt. It's important to me that that I go down with this ship. That kind of attitude is the kind of you become a fulcrum then, I think. Without that attitude, that's the liberality that I talked about, that isn't sufficiently powerful to challenge corruption and fascism and, you know, special interests and all those kinds of things. So again, ways of seeing, I've talked a little bit about that already. I've got opposite of prey drive. Laura Mauvais. Oh, okay. So ways of seeing. Yeah, you mentioned very briefly the witch program that's on BBC at the moment. Excuse me. I mentioned the male gaze, which excuse me, comes from a film essay by Laura Mauvais, I think her name is. She talks about three different, in her critique of film, she talks about three different types of gaze. There's the gaze of the camera, so what the camera shows, and in loads of films, you know, there's usually, like you know, sort of an up and down shot of a woman, or lingering on curves or whatever. There's the gaze of the people who are in the film, so those people who are like, so my gaze right now. There's my framing. The framing of this camera is gazing. I am also gazing. That's involved, and there's also your gaze at me, which is involved. Three different ways of seeing, three different ways of being, or and analyzing, objectifying. Who was it? I can't remember if it was Freud or Sartre. Talked about the sort of dehumanizing objectification of the gaze. I think it might have been Sartre. You probably know more about this than I do. That that a thing observed then becomes a, you know, you are objectified by a gaze. You are looked at, therefore you become an object. So maintaining your own capacity to see is a way to remain a protagonist rather than an object, something to act rather than to be acted upon. There's a really good YouTube video, if you just put in male gaze, female gaze, that talks about that film Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and the director talking about the equality of things like height, language, intellect, that it was really important for her that this be a story about love between two equals, that there was no power, particularly power disparity between the two protagonists, both of whom happen to be female. And the act of seeing and being seen and rebelling and, you know, resisting the act of being captured as a picture is explored in that film. The woman who sent the last portrait painter away, the lady who's the lady on fire. She's already gotten rid of one artist because she refused to become an object in a painting, and I think that's those ideas are quite fertile. Resistance is fertile. Two more: revolution, rebellion, excess, Artaud, Romeo and Juliet. The Theatre and Its Double by Antonin Artaud starts out with a description of two lovers who run away. It's a play in which the two lovers run away, and he talks about excess. So they go from one Bonnie and Clyde-esque act. You might say it's a little bit like Oliver Stone and Tarantino's Natural Born Killers, something like that. This play that Artaud is describing, they go from sort of outrageous, like they steal stuff, they kill people, they eat people, something like that goes from sort of outrage to outrage, all because of their love. And it's not to show an example of a decent way to behave. It's to seed the idea that kind of resistance and rebellion is possible. It's an imago. It's an image of rebellion or resistance. It plants the idea that the way things used to be is not the way that it has to continue to be. We're currently communicating via video message, and that capacity has been around for ages, and I've never used it until now. And it's because you did it first. Last one, quality of freedom. The quality of freedom is not strained. I think it would be useful to look at the word freedom and talk about it with a few prepositions. Freedom to, freedom from, freedom over, freedom through. What different ways can we relate to and through the word freedom? I'm a little bit suspicious of the word freedom because the difference between rights and responsibility. I'm one of those folks who is suspicious of having rights, and am more inclined to believe that in Ubuntu, in other words, that we offer humanity to other people. We cannot claim, we don't make ourselves people. Our gift, it's within our gift. For instance, the word enchanted or encantado. In the Spanish, when you meet someone, you say hello, you say your name, you say encantado, enchanted. It's not all about, or it doesn't have to be just about a sort of a bourgeois way of saying, like, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. When you chant something, you say something, and you bring it to life in your world. You offer it your breath. You speak it to power. You might speak it to life. Call it to life. When you say someone's name, you are calling them forth into your world, Matt, and are offering them value and saying, you are alive, and you're affirming personhood. And so in that act, I haven't bound you to any service in the same way that like a warlock or a sorcerer might conjure a spirit, a familiar spirit, and then bind it to a particular task and then banish it. By no means. But I am calling upon you, and I call upon the spirits of goodness that are inspiring you to better health and wisdom, and friendship to sustain you. And excuse me. When we do that to each other, when we call for each other, we are bringing each other back to life. We are retying, religion. We're doing that, and freedom has all kinds of tendencies towards the free market and free capital, free trade, free to starve any way you like. You can work in my factory, or you can starve, and you're free to choose that. Those kinds of things. So what do we mean by freedom? What is it that we are wanting to be free from or free of? And what do we want to be tied to? And without those ties that bind us, as what's his name? Johnny Cash would say, I keep a close watch on this heart of mine. I keep an eye out for the tie that binds. Because you're mine, I walk the line. We've got to look out for and maintain those ties that bind us together. And we talk about weak ties and strong ties in social currency. I've said enough, I think. I'm starting to bore myself, so I'm going to sign off. I wish you well, mate, and hope to see you back next week. Love you. Take care, mate.